excited to be talking to Cheryl Mullings today. Originally from Canada, Cheryl is now a cross-border artist and has worked professionally throughout Canada and the United States. She has studied improv with the Upright Citizens Brigade in New York City, and in recent years, she has found an artistic home during the summer at the Barnstormers Theatre in Tamworth, New Hampshire. She has been featured at the Charlottetown Festival, the Sterling Festival Theatre at Stage West Calgary and Mississauga, and has had a couple of fun-filled adventures with the Disney Cruise Line aboard the Disney Wonder and the Disney Magic. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Brenna.
I'm so excited to be talking to you today. The first question that I have is, what advice would you give to someone who wants to make a career in the arts?
Well, get a pen and paper because it's a long list. um, well, I would say probably first and foremost, I think an education, if you're really serious about it, is a really good idea because I feel like, a lot of people joke about, having this degree. But for me, I really feel like as an artist, it allowed me to work out some of the kinks that I wouldn't have even known about certain things had I not gone to school. I went to the University of Windsor, which actually in Canada was one of the only places at the time that you could actually get a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Music Theatre. And then we had other programs throughout the country that were colleges or sort of like institutions or academies or things like that. So for me, not that at the time I really had a plan B, but for me to have that Bachelor of Fine Arts and a university education meant in the future, if I wanted to get a master's or if I wanted to continue my education, I wouldn't have to start from scratch, which I think is very important. Because I think as you go through life, sometimes you discover within the business, like I know a lot of people that have gone back and they've gotten their masters in directing or their masters in film and TV when originally they studied theater. And so I think that's very important for a lot of reasons. So I would say that's pretty like number one on the list. And I think it's important to just pick a place that you feel is right for you. Because I did have a couple of choices, and I'm really glad I went in the direction that I did, again, because of the university degree, which also I should clarify, because I'm from Canada, there is a difference between going to university and college. It's basically when you go to college, if you were to return to get a master's or another degree, you would have to go back to university to get certain courses to then continue your education. So I should clarify that is a slight difference between the two countries and the education system. So that I would say is number one. And then the other thing I always tell people is to make sure that it is really like you're passionate about it. It's actually really what you want to do because obviously there are a lot of celebrities that we know of, and it's fun to think of yourself as being rich and famous. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be rich and famous or wanting to be, earn a living wage. and I'm not poo-pooing like, oh, you shouldn't want that. But I also think that some people only do it for that. And that's what I think is maybe not the healthiest choice. Like, I think it's really amazing when you become rich and famous because of what you do and because you are exceptional and because, it comes to you out of your love for what you're doing, I think is, I guess, in my opinion, a better way to go about becoming rich and famous. And I just think it's important because it is not an easy path, no matter which way you slice it. I know some people that from the minute they, got their first job, never stopped working. And, and that went on for years and, got on Broadway very easily and continued working on Broadway for years. But eventually something happens, whether it's just like there's just they've done that show and there's not something else, or whatever happens, there's always a time period at some point in somebody's career where things are not running so smoothly. And then sometimes it's the opposite, that people work really hard and they don't have a lot of work coming their way, and then all of a sudden it's like gangbusters, like they have to be turning things down. So it's just, if you don't really love it and if you're not really passionate about it, that is even harder. Like to just stick with it through all of that is really hard. So I think if you really know that it's what you want to do, then it's much easier to get through those, the valleys to get to the peaks, in that way. And I think in terms of that, like having a realistic expectation of what you're getting yourself into. Not to sound scary or anything, but like, for example, I went to a high school of the arts, and I actually had one of my closest friends when we were in school. He had an agent. He was in commercials. He would do theater. Like, he was always going to auditions, and I would like tag along, which I think was actually a part of the best education I ever got, because I saw the things that he went through, and he was a guy, right? It's always different, men and women. There is a difference. And I would see the number of auditions he would go to. I would see like, no, nobody calls you to say, oh, thank you so much for coming. We're not hiring you. Like, you just go like day after day, or, and you do all this prep work. And I remember one time he had to audition for something where they wanted to see his hands, and he bit his nails, and he was like, what am I going to do? Like, my hands look awful. Like, it's just all these crazy things that people ask you to do, that it's just, and getting used to the idea of like, yeah, you're going to do all of that, and nobody's going to pat you on the back, and nobody's going to, you just got to keep doing it. And then eventually I think he landed like a McDonald's commercial, like a national commercial, which pays a lot of money. So then you get one job that like makes up for all of that. So for me, that was an education. And I think too, I actually heard somebody talking about this the other day, having like a plan A, and just having a plan A and not having anything to fall back on, versus people that have a plan B. And then someone, which I thought was interesting, was saying they had a plan A, and then they had a plan like B, C, D, E to get to their plan A. Like, it was all like all of the different ways that she could make her plan A succeed, which I hadn't thought of that before. But I thought that was interesting, because I do think, like I said, when you go through some of these ups and downs, it's important too that, I mean, you get to a point that you still have to earn a living. So then it's like, okay, how do I do that? And famously, many people work in restaurants and bars, and the pandemic has been very eye-opening for a lot of people, because a lot of those jobs you couldn't do. So it's interesting to think of new ways to earn money, and new ways to think of what you do and how you do it, and how you could do it differently to earn money, or all of those things. So I think it's just important to have a realistic expectation, that it might not all be rainbows and fairy tales. I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think those are like, thank you for bringing all of those up. I think they're so important, everything. Um, my second question is, what was it like to work for Disney and to work on a Disney cruise?
Well, I was so excited when I worked for Disney, because it feels like that is something that kind of feels like a dream come true, or a fairy tale, at least for me. And I think, being from Canada, I had never been to Disney World, or, I grew up with like the Disney movies and things like that, but it was just something I had never really thought too much about. Like I would go to the auditions, but then when it actually happened, it was very exciting. And it's such a, this might be a big answer because there was that excitement of just like working for Disney and all that that would entail. And then also like working on the ship was like a whole other thing, which I also, because I love the ocean, I love the water, I love all of that, but it was quite a learning curve, shall we say. So the cool thing about Disney is that, especially on the ships, their entertainment is like priority. So the cool thing about that is that their stages on board were very high tech. Like they have like trap doors and lifts and things that are all automated, and people flying through the air, and like it was very impressive for a ship. I don't think I'd ever worked in an actual theater that had that much in terms of like the technical side of things that was that advanced. So I'll start with the rehearsal process. I mean, that was also very almost regimented because it's Disney and because they have different ships, and at the time the one ship would have, I think I think there was a difference. Like there was one show that they did on one ship that we didn't do, but basically because they did the same shows and they did them year after year, it was like they had to be identical. So that was interesting in terms of a creative process because as artists, we weren't really given a lot of creative freedom. It was like you had like a smidgen of what you might normally have because everything was like, well, it has to be like this and you have to hit your mark here. And also because when you're on the ship, you're not playing with a live band or a live orchestra, it's recorded tracks. So really everything is timed out. And like I said, with all of the trap doors and the lifts and things moving, it's like, if you are standing here in this moment, you will fall through the floor. And there were lots of times where they said, like, this is a very dangerous moment in the show. So before you do anything, just somehow like check behind you and make sure that the trap behind you has closed before you step backwards. And so that was interesting. And I hadn't, up until that experience, dealt with something that was so, like I remember sort of trying to do my own thing and then sort of being told, well, can you do it like this? Which is kind of classic. Like a lot of actors and creative people know that when you're working with a director, like it's not really great practice to like tell somebody how to say their line. You sort of let them figure it out and you let them, interpret it themselves. And that's part of what creating is. So that was interesting. It was like, can you just do it like this? I was like, okay, but my way is funnier, but yeah, I'll do it your way. So that was kind of interesting. And yeah, so not a lot of creative freedom, shall we say, but also in terms of like getting on the ship and doing the shows, again, I'd never been in something where the costumes were so like, my dress was really heavy, my wig was really heavy. Like I'd never dealt with like that level of like costuming. And so that was fun. And I guess the other aspect too, it's like when you do any show, I feel like the people that you're with are important, right? Because you're with them for a lot of time and it's a vulnerable experience when you're doing shows with people. This was extra like heightened because not only are you with these people all the time, you're living with these people. Like you get on the ship and you're there for 6 months. So I had heard from some friends before I worked on the ship, like, oh, like what advice would you give? And everyone was like, the people you work with, it's really important to just try to like maintain good relationships because you are literally stuck with those people. And fortunately, we had a great cast of people. Fortunately, we didn't have a lot of injuries, which is something that happens a lot on a ship, especially with dancers, the ship is moving. Sometimes people get injured. If you get injured on a ship, sometimes they have to send you home because it's not safe for you to be on the ship, because as a crew member, and especially as entertainers, we have these they're like life duties. Like a lot of us were in charge of lifeboats. Because famously, a lot of people on cruise ships, they come from all over the world, and a lot of people don't have the greatest command of the English language. But as entertainers, most of us were, I think the majority of the cast was American. We had like, I think 3 or 4 Canadians, 1 British guy. So we all were native English speaking people. And so they put you in charge of a lifeboat because if things are getting that crazy on the ship, they need somebody who's going to be in charge of, mostly the ships are, docking out of Florida. So most of the people on the ships, generally speaking, are American, or at least English is their first language. So they needed people to be in control to give clear instructions if the ship is sinking, which is also something I don't think I really, before I got on the ship, had really contemplated. They tell you like, oh, you'll have other duties on the ship. But then when they tell you what your duty is, and it's like, you're in charge of a lifeboat that might have 50 people on it, like including children. And it's like, you're putting me in charge of that. Are you sure? So that was crazy. And that's the other thing. You sign up and you're like, at the time, and I don't know what they're doing. I guess they're not doing anything right now, but they rehearse in Toronto, which is actually where I'm from. And then you rehearse there. I think we were there for 4 or 5 weeks, and then you go to Florida. And so you spend all of this time learning the shows. Everything is about the shows. Everything is about making that perfect. And then you get on a plane and you get to Florida, and there was like a week in between getting there and getting on the ship. And then that was all, they call it Disney traditions. And some of the like ship training. Well, Disney traditions, it's like, I felt like I was being like indoctrinated into a little bit of a cult. It was like the history of Disney, like all of these things, all of and you're in this place called Celebration, Florida, which is like being in Pleasantville. Like it's like all of these perfect little houses, all painted in these pastel colors, and it was kind of trippy. And we went to these classes, about 3 days worth, like 3 full days of classes to learn the history of Disney. There were quizzes, there were like group activities. It was intense. And all of the things that basically you're not allowed to talk about. Like there are so many things that it's like, I don't actually know. I think you could actually get fired for some of the things that you might say that normal people might just say. And it was like, you can't say that. So it was like, if you are amongst the shows that we did, there was one show that was called Disney Dreams. So you had, all of the famous Disney characters in these little sort of vignettes to create a story. Ultimately, it's like a little girl who is dreaming, and in her dreams, Peter Pan comes to her, and then you see like little snippets of like Cinderella and now I can't even think of what they all were, but like Aladdin, all of these little snippets of these famous characters. So anybody that played what they call a classic character, so Cinderella, Prince Charming, Snow White, any of those characters, if somebody while you were on the ship came to you like a passenger and said, oh, I saw you in this show, like you're Cinderella, aren't you? It's like, you cannot say that you are. You are like, you have to say like, oh, I'm friends with Cinderella. I'll let her know you enjoyed the show. And so that was really for me like, what? You can't, what? Like, and there were times that it happened. And it's like, I'm sorry, the Prince Charming we had, like he's a very handsome, noticeable man that people would be like, oh, look, it's Prince Charming. And like we're all standing there, like, and we're all in the show together. And then it's like, well, me who was not I didn't play a classic character. It's like, yeah, I was in the show. I was like, oh, no, no, Prince Charming. What do you like? It was just such a weird thing to commit yourself to for 6 months. So that was very interesting. That had never really crossed my mind when I got that job. And then, yeah, it's interesting too, because then the people that you work with, like some of those people for even now are still some of my closest friends. And so it's interesting too, like just the people you meet. It's part of why I moved to the States, actually. So it was really life changing. And it's just interesting to see where people go. Like some of those people, I don't think they perform anymore. Some people, like my one friend, Prince Charming, has had like a very robust Broadway career. Like he's done, I think, 6 shows. Now he writes musicals. He actually left New York right before the pandemic, like before any of us knew about this. And now he lives in Colorado and he's focusing more on writing. I also worked with, and I don't tell a lot of people this because I actually understudied her, but we are nothing alike. Jennifer Hudson was in my cast. And everybody always wants to know all like, what was that like? And it was crazy because it was before she did really anything. It was before American Idol. It was before she was on Broadway. It was before Dreamgirls. And so what's cool about that is to see that really anything that you do, like you don't know who you're working with, all like these people, one day they could hire you or, like if that's another crazy aspect. But it's interesting too, to know like from where she came from. Like she literally had never left Chicago before she came to Toronto to rehearse for the ship. And so she was, sort of, I guess naive is the right word, but not in a bad way. She just had like never really left home. She'd only done, I think, a couple of shows, but I don't know if she'd ever actually been paid, like if she'd done it professionally. And she was like, we did this show called Hercules and we played the muses. And it was like, because you're on the ship and because of the casting, it wasn't exactly as it is in the movie. So there were basically like the 3 Black girls, and then they had like a blonde muse, and then they had a guy to make up the 5 muses. So Jennifer was kind of like the main muse, Calliope. And, when she opened her mouth to sing on that first day, it was just like, I don't think any single one of us didn't have chills. It's like when somebody is that gifted, it's like, it's amazing to be in the room. And I remember they had this one moment. This is how I became her understudy. We had to, in this one show, there was like a circle of life soloist. And basically there was no written music. It was just the track. And then they're like, oh, just like make it up. Like these are the words, but like the page of music had no notes on it. It was just like the little X's. And it was like, just make it up as you go. And we all know the song, The Circle of Life, like I think most of us do. But for me, I'm like, I was classically trained. Yes, I'm kind of a belter, but I'm actually more of a soprano. And I'm not a gospel singer. They made myself and like the 3 of the like the Black muses sing this improv, this gospel version of Circle of Life on the spot in rehearsal one day. And it was like, that is my worst nightmare. Like, give me the music in advance. I will learn it. I will ask somebody for help. I will, but don't ask me to do a gospel improv on the spot beside this person who we now know is Jennifer Hudson. So I think just knowing that, probably what came out of her mouth. So she's there, even though she's not famous yet, but still that voice is happening. And then they're like, okay, Cheryl, your turn. And I'm like, it's the circle of life. Like, I'm just like, no, this is horrifying. Please. Like, me and the other girl were just like, can you please just give it to her? Like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. But then she had to have an understudy. And I was the understudy, which was, this is part of why I don't tell people, because they're like, oh, you understudy Jennifer Hudson. And they think that I sing like that. And I don't. And when I had to go on, I just was like, I was terrified. It was a learning experience because now I know that I will never be Jennifer Hudson and I don't have to try to sound like Jennifer Hudson. But in that moment, it was like the worst thing because I feel like, at least my worst fears as a singer and a performer, which is like, they're going to compare me to her. Everybody's heard her sing it a million times. Now I'm singing it. I'm not as good. I don't sing like that. Like all of those things just where I couldn't stop the negative, like recording in my mind of like, I will never be that good. So anyways, so don't do that. Always know, like I said, now I know you are your own person. You cannot, do not try to be somebody else. It will never work. You just like know your strengths, know that, and that's actually an important thing to know too when you get into this business. And I think you should try everything because sometimes you don't know you're good at something until you try it. But you do get to a point where you sort of have to be realistic and like, okay, that is not my strength. And if I'm going to attempt to do that, just be aware that like there's always room for improvement, but sometimes it's just not your thing. Anyway, so all that to say, that when we were even on the ship, and this was like a long time ago, which I'm sure you can guess because if it was before she did American Idol, that was a long time ago. And it was so long ago, I don't even know if you'll know what this is. People used to have their parents send them recordings on a VHS tape to the ship of like weekly shows, and that was when American Idol was new and like really big. So we had our one friend every week, his mom would send him a VHS tape of American Idol. And so there were certain people that would like go to his room and watch. And she was one of the people that would sometimes watch it. And she was like, I want to be on that show. And everyone was like, you should be on that show. So like that's another cool thing that happened. And like when we were in rehearsals in Toronto, sometimes, after rehearsal or right before the day off, you hang out in somebody's room or, we would go out for dinner, sometimes different things. And I will never forget this one time. We all were in, I think it was Jennifer's room. And everyone was like, oh, Jennifer, sing this, sing that. And she sang the famous song from Dreamgirls, like, and I'm telling you, I'm not going to famous song. And that was crazy because even then, like I said, before she was famous, before she is who we know her to be now, it was still amazing. So when she landed that movie, it was sort of like, that is, yeah, that's what she should be doing. That's exactly, like, and I feel like for all of the fairy tales in the world, like that was something for her that just like was meant to be and really changed the trajectory of her entire career, her life. Like it's kind of amazing when you think of that you might work with somebody one day and you could either be that person or these people or you just never know. That's one of the exciting things about a career in the arts is that it's very adventurous and you never know where it might lead you.
Wow, that's so cool, and it's such interesting insight into that like world of like working on a cruise ship and working for Disney. Such such a goal of mine, so that's it's been really awesome to hear. I was wondering what the highlight of your career has been, and then on the flip side, what's something you haven't done yet that you hope to accomplish?
Well, I will say I do feel like I have like these certain like there's not one, just one highlight. And they're like highlights for certain reasons. For example, I worked at the Charlottetown Festival, and that was before I was a member of the union, so I was non-equity. And in Canada, the Charlottetown Festival is like a very well-known theater, and it's on Prince Edward Island. And every year they do a production of Anne of Green Gables, which is like famous in Canada. Nobody really knows about it here, but um, and every year they would do that. So it's a long-standing tradition. And Prince Edward Island is one of the most beautiful places in the world. It's so pretty and quaint, and the red sand beaches, like it's true, they're stunning. It just was a beautiful, beautiful environment. And then I was actually part of the young company there. So I wasn't part of the main stage. So I wasn't in Anne of Green Gables. But what was cool about that was, as a member of the young company, we got to take classes. So we would have like a dance classes, I think twice a week, and we would have acting classes and like vocal coaching, like singing lessons with these well-known professionals. Again, like if I say a lot of their names because I'm Canadian, you might not recognize them, but like in Canada at the time, it was like a big deal. And so we didn't get paid very much, but it was totally, totally worth it for the whole experience. And again, like I said, when you get on a ship and you're um, working with these people, and it was a little bit different because we're all on the island together for a period of time, but we all like lived in different houses and things like that. But it really was one of the best, especially as a like I hadn't been out of school very long, and like I said, I was still non-equity. It was one of the best experiences for me to really understand professional theater and what's expected of you and how to behave. And I would love to go back there. I would love to go back and be in one of their main stage shows. That's still a dream of mine. So I would say that's one highlight. And then I would say, in the little intro, you mentioned that I worked at the Sterling Festival Theatre, which is this little theater kind of not in the middle of nowhere exactly, but like in a small town in Ontario, Canada. But that was a place where that's a highlight for me because it was the first time I really experienced working in a place more than once with the same people, the same artistic director, who really, I would say, I feel like she took me under her wing. Like I crashed an audition and she cast me in something, and then she just kept casting me in things. And she was like my cheerleader, if that makes sense. Like she always was like, she was very encouraging. She always told me, she's like, every time I ask you to do something, like I'm amazed. Like, you know, I'm a bit of a belter. She didn't know that I could sing soprano. So one day I had to record something. I think I went into the theater and asked somebody to do a video for me. And she happened to be in her office. And she said she walked into the theater like not knowing like what was going on or who was in there. And she was like, how do you sing like that? Like she was like, I just feel like every time I turn around, you do something I didn't know you could do, which I don't know, when you're a young performer, and I feel like we all have insecurities, to have somebody that just like believes in you and says things like that to you is like very empowering, because sometimes you're like, oh, I guess, yeah, I don't know. I think too, I'm not a person to be like, oh, I do this and I do that. Like I'm not a, I don't do that. Maybe I should, but so it was kind of cool to just have somebody recognize that and see that, and then be like, okay, well, the next time we do a show, I want to do something where you can do that. It was like, really? So that was one of the coolest experiences. Like she actually got me my first agent in Toronto. She was like, I don't understand how you don't have an agent. I was like, I can't get an agent. I've looked for an agent. That's another difficult thing. And she was like, I'm calling some people. I'm like, seriously? She got me an interview and she got me an agent. And then like I got my equity card there. So that was huge. And those people too, a lot of those people are friends of mine to this day. So that was like a really important experience. Guess I would say obviously Disney. That's a highlight. I'd never been to Disney World before. I've been several times now. But no, that too, like I loved living on the ship. They have a lot of rules. They really have a lot of rules. Some people can't handle the rules. I was like, those are the rules. This is what we're doing for 6 months. Like things could be a lot worse. So we that was great. And I would say the latest highlight, like moving to the States, that was challenging, shall we say, because you kind of start from scratch. Some people don't do it the way I did it. They wait to get a job, they wait to be on Broadway, they get their Broadway show, and then they move to the States. And I was like, I'm not waiting. So that is challenging when you show up in a new country, which is a whole like everybody's like, oh, you're Canadian. It's like, yeah, they don't care. I can't get a bank account. I have no credit here. Like nobody recognizes like the school that I went to. Nobody knows any of these theaters. Like I might as well have like fallen off the back of a truck. Like it really was challenging. Um, and it's hard when you're in that situation and you're just trying to figure out how to live in New York City and then get up and go to auditions, because also another difference between Canada and the States is in Canada you can't just go to auditions. They don't Their equity auditions are run differently. You basically have to submit. They have to ask you to come to the audition. If you find out where, like if you don't get an audition time but you find out where the audition is, sometimes you can go and wait to crash the audition. But it's like then you spend a whole day. It's sort of like the equivalent of in the States being non-equity and kind of like waiting around all day to see if they'll see you. But in Canada it's like you're already an equity member. They just like won't give you a time slot, and there's no rule that says that they have to. So that is what's frustrating, I found at home. But then here you really have to pick yourself up and get yourself to the audition, because nobody else is going to do it for you. And some days that's really hard. Some days it's really hard to, especially if you know you have to be at work at a certain time or you have to do all of these other, life things. It's like you have to do that. So anyways, we're talking about highlights. But anyway, my point was one of my other highlights is that in that transition of moving to the States and looking for work, and there were a lot of shall we say maybe more downs than ups. And I finally booked a show at this tiny little theater that I'd never heard of. And it was interesting because it was one of the years that I had never auditioned more here. That for whatever reason that year I was like, I don't care what it is. I need a job in the theater. I'm going crazy. And I went to so many auditions, and luckily I'm organized, so I keep little notes of things. So when I got this call back, I couldn't remember. I was like, I don't remember. I don't I don't know what audition that was. So I went back to my notes and saw, oh, now I remember what that was. And it was this little theater that did a show, and the dates were like, it was like the show only ran for 5 days. And in my mind, I was like, what? How do you do a show in only 5 days? Like, how is that profitable? How do you mount a show? Like, I just was so confused by, just the whatever was in the breakdown. But it turns out this little theater, again, in the middle of nowhere, Tamworth, New Hampshire, the Barnstormers, is like this little magical place. And again, that has become sort of like my experience in the States. And finally, I found these people. Like, I don't know, there's something for me about um, being around people that do what you do and understand what you do. And again, when you're working on shows, you're more vulnerable, and you're with these people in sort of a very intimate experience. So you bond really quickly with people. And those people, I've worked there, I think, 7 summers in a row, and like they're like my New York family. Most of them, not everybody, but a lot of people lived in New York. Now, only a few of us are still in New York, but we all like we have like a Zoom call sometimes, and we pretend that we're like hanging out in the kitchen of the house that's like where all the actors stay. We call it like let's have a like Gilman house like hangout, and we all grab a drink and turn on our Zoom, and it's kind of fun. But like that really that changed my world here. Like all of a sudden, I felt like, and interestingly enough, in terms of my skills, that like tenfold. I had never had to put up a show in less time in my life. Like by the time you start rehearsals to the time you're like in a dress rehearsal was like 5, 6 days. I had never done that. The first show I did, I was beside myself, so nervous. I think I made myself sick actually. And I don't know, I was convinced I would never work there again because I just was so terrified. I didn't know if I was doing anything right. Like I didn't I was just like, I don't know. There's so many people here. Like they kind of have a resident company of people. And it was like I was the newbie. I was like, I don't know if I'm doing any of this right. I don't know. Everybody's so good at just like doing these things. Well, now I'm a pro. I really feel like because of that experience, I could be like a swing on Broadway, which before in my life, I was like, never. I could never do that. I could never step onto a stage having only like a few rehearsals. Now I'm like, oh yeah, I could do that. Because you have to learn things like, and I always try to go as prepared as I can possibly be. So if I get that job, I try to memorize my lines in advance. I try to learn all the music in advance because for me, it's just not fun to be learning it on the fly. It's not, it's just too much pressure. You can't go to the lake after rehearsal and really relax if you're like, I don't know my lines. And like, there are going to be people in the audience tomorrow. And I don't know, I get to this part every time and I don't know I don't know what comes next. I don't know what I'm saying. That's not fun for me. Some people get a thrill out of that. No, I want to go. I want to know what's happening. I want to like I want to, and for me too, it lets me be more creative. Like if I'm not standing in rehearsal being like, oh, what's next? I don't know what's next. And I can just know what's next and figure out like, what is that moment? Like, I can't figure that out. And instead of sitting there being like, oh, what's my line? To be like, oh, this doesn't feel right. Like, what? Like, how can we do this differently to like make this moment work? To me, that's more important when you're in the moment with the other people. It's like, because then I also don't want to be like in maybe a vulnerable or intimate moment with somebody else and have them be like, sorry, I can't remember my line. Like that's also like it like interrupts the creative sort of flow. So I will say for sure the Barnstormers has changed my, it's upped my game, shall we say. And I feel like I have gained um, many more skills that I never would have gained. And in terms of confidence too, just you know being able to, a lot of times you do more than one show and you're rehearsing during the day and doing a different show at night, and you're you're doing a play and you're doing a musical. So it's like in a way it is, that's the other thing, it's hard work. A lot of times everyone's like, oh, it sounds like so much fun. It is so much fun, but it's really hard work. And I think you really have to be disciplined to know when it's time to work and when it's time to have fun. I have been known to practice some dance moves in the kitchen with a glass of wine, which was productive. I felt like after I did it, 10 times, even with a little, wine, I was better.
That's so funny. I love that. Um, what's oh, my next question is, what are some of the things that you do kind of like as part of your work right now that you didn't anticipate originally?
Well, oh, and I just remembered I didn't talk about like my future
Oh,
highlights,
yeah.
which is definitely Broadway. It's why I'm still hanging on in New York City, like by my fingernails. That's definitely a goal. And I would love to do movie and TV and all of those stuff that you can make more money doing would be nice. But definitely Broadway. And also in Canada, there are two festivals that are very well known, the Shaw Festival and the Stratford Festival. And it has always been my dream since I was a kid to be a company member there. So those are just to tag on to the last the last part of the last question. Um, so this was what are some of the things I do? Can you ask me one more time?
Yeah. What are some of the things that you do now that you didn't anticipate going into your field?
Yes. Well, I will say the biggest thing that has evolved since I left school and was taught about the business is this like technological, digital age. This is a huge learning curve, shall we say, that um, I don't think we could have anticipated to this degree. Because obviously there were times in the past, like I said, when I worked at the Sterling Festival Theater, I recorded something to send to somebody, but I like recorded it probably on a VHS tape. You know what I mean? With a giant camcorder. I don't even remember like what we used, but it was that kind of thing where it's like, yeah, you don't just like pull out your phone and so I will say, especially in this past year, this whole evolution of self tapes um, is also probably my least favorite thing to do. So that has been challenging because for me, I find when something is my least favorite thing to do, I don't want to do it and I procrastinate a lot. So that has been challenging because it is a learning curve. And especially in this, what's happening now, it's like you can't just maybe ask certain people for help like you would because a lot of people aren't here. When you're in isolation and when you're in quarantine, it's like you can't just invite people over. Hopefully that will be coming to an end soon. But like there's a lot of things and I'm fine to learn things on my own and do things on my own. But sometimes when it's like you're dragging your feet, like it's kind of nice to maybe have someone to help you, but I'm also not one to ask for help. So that to me has been the most sort of like one of the things I did not anticipate, and one of the things I still find really challenging. I do feel like now that I've done it, it's not as terrifying, but I still don't like it. I don't because the other thing I don't like, part of why I like doing theater is because I don't have to watch myself. It happens in the moment and I'm there and you're with your people and there's like lovely people in the audience. Like there's lots of energy and and it's great. And then it's done. And I don't have to go back and watch it and be like, whoa, I did that? I didn't think it looked like that. Oh, why did someone tell me all of those things? And then you do a self tape and then you have to edit it. And it's like watching myself over and over. And then also when you're even just trying to record it and you're singing something over and over, you're reading or doing a monologue over, like you feel crazy. And all these little things happen that maybe somebody might not notice, but because I'm doing it, I'm like, oh, no, I screwed that up. And then it becomes this like, you just like, I spent like 3 hours singing the same 32 bars over and over, like belting at the top of my lungs in my little apartment, like waiting for somebody to knock on the door and be like, can you please stop? Like, stop. And I don't know. It just was like, uh, I think it can be fun. For me, that's not my idea of fun. I would, And I never thought I would say that because, like I said, when you go to auditions here, sometimes it's very challenging to like pick yourself up and go. And I always say, it's like you have to put on a suit of armor before you go just to like sort of protect yourself from, whatever might happen, things people might say to you or not say to you or whatever. You have to have a really thick skin. And I never thought I would say, I'd much rather just go to an audition. But that's ironically a lot of times how I feel right now. Like I would rather just go there and be in the moment with these people in the room instead of being in my apartment by myself, driving myself crazy for 3 hours just to get one clip that then I have to watch, over and over again and then edit. And then like it just, I don't know, to me that feels not so fun.
Yeah.
But that's me. There are other people I know that love doing self-tapes. They think it's great. Like, oh, I get to do it this many times. I get to choose the one that's best. It's like, and there is something to that. That's not how I feel. I can see the benefit. I don't feel the benefit.
I agree with you. I completely virtual college auditions was not really fun for me. I'm not a self-tape person either. Um,
Yeah, it just feels weird.
yeah, not a fan.
It doesn't
Um,
feel natural.
yeah, I was wondering, and you kind of mentioned this a little bit with the Barnstormers, but what experiences or training have you found the most helpful in getting you where you are?
Wow, that's a good one. Um, I think discipline is huge. And again, I think this also goes back to like really wanting to do this because I think when you really want to do it, you continue to learn, whether it's taking a class or a workshop or whatever that might be, or reading. I feel like my initial training was very important, and then again, like you keep evolving, and so I do feel like some of the techniques I learned early on from my education, I still use. I might use them a little differently, and but I think that's one of the core things that I still go through my script and I still figure out, you know, I try to line by line go through and figure out like what are the objectives here? Like what is happening? What am I really doing? And as an actor, like it's more exciting if you are doing something, you're not just saying lines, you're not just talking to someone. Like there's always something happening. Um, so I think just continuing to figure out how to be better, like every time. I'm always trying to like improve. And I think that's important. I don't, sometimes I wonder like discipline, can anybody learn discipline? I guess. But like sometimes I also feel like it's just a personality trait that you just have to be. And I'm not perfect, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I'm not disciplined. Sometimes I I don't want to do it. But it's like I think that's part of too what is nice about when you do work somewhere a few like times. There's sort of it's not a saying, but like it's kind of known in the theater that if someone looks at your resume and you've only worked at one theater like once, like if your resume is filled with just like you've never worked at the same theater twice, it's like kind of not a good sign because there's this sort of idea that like why didn't they hire you back? So I guess that's part of um, yeah, I think if you are disciplined, if you work hard, if you're committed to what you're doing, if you're kind to the people you work with, and if you treat people like human beings, we're all in this together, whether you're an actor, the director, the stage manager, the music director, the crew, the technical director, the set builder. Like we all have the same goal. We're all here for the same. Nobody is above anybody. Just because I'm the person on stage doesn't mean they're not working 10 times harder than I am and up all night building sets and figuring out the lighting and all of these things that I don't know how to do. So it's um I think, I don't know, it's just important to keep all of those things in mind. And I think just to try to not lose the hunger of learning more and figuring out new ways to do things, learning a new technique and trying it out. Maybe it might not work, but I think it's important to just try to keep evolving and experimenting, or um, just to keep trying, I think.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. Like, thank you for saying that. One of the like final questions that is just a fun question
Uh-huh.
is what makes you happy? And that doesn't have to relate to theater, or it can if you want it to.
Yeah, that's a great question because, like I said, sometimes in these peaks and valleys, it's really hard in the valley when you don't have anything else to look forward to. And I do find there's always this moment when you audition for something and you found out that you booked it. It's like a honeymoon period where it's like you work so hard and then you finally get the call and you get maybe a part that you've always wanted to play, and it's like, oh, this is great, I'm so excited to get to do this, and you feel so excited in that time, and then you have to sit down and actually learn the part. So I do find like that's one thing that makes me super happy when you finally like achieve that. But outside of that, and this is also part of why I love working at the Barnstormers and going to Tamworth, is because that place is really remote. That place, I don't know if you've ever been up there, but like there's one bus that stops there twice a day, I think, in the morning and the afternoon. It's really hard to get to. It's really beautiful. And it's the complete opposite of New York City. So, what's kind of like great about that place is it's tied into, it's like two of my loves. It's like I get to do theater, but then I get to be in this beautiful place, and I love swimming in the lake, and I love going on little adventures, and depending on the day, like going for a hike and seeing all of the beautiful things there are to see there. So that's one thing, and that's hard in the city too. Sometimes I have a car here. I don't right now, but even in the city, I would, if I had my car, hop in the car and just drive. You can drive 45 minutes to an hour outside of the city and be like, there's a place called Bear Mountain that's close to here. That's like, you feel like you're not anywhere near the city. So for me, it's like getting out into nature. I've always loved riding a bike. So then I started bringing a bike when I would work at Barnstormers. So that's been cool. And then recently, with the pandemic in the city here, initially it wasn't like a year ago. I didn't go anywhere. And then I discovered City Bike. I don't know if you guys have like a bike share or if you know what that is. It's like a bike share where you like rent a bike for a period of time, and that has changed my life in the city because now I barely get on a bus. I only get on a bus if it's raining. I ride a bike everywhere. You can get points. So now it's a competition. Whenever I get points, you can like extend your bike membership and you can get like free minutes on the e-bike. And so that's like my new fun game. Like every day I'm like, okay, I hope it's nice out so I can go for a bike ride. So I love riding my bike like I'm 10. um, and what else do I like to do? I mean, I love going to see theater. That's also been really hard this year because I also just love being in the theater and I love seeing what other people do. And I love when the lights go down and I love hearing the orchestra, like all of those things. Um, I love traveling. that was another cool thing about working on the ship, even though we went in just a tiny little circle over and over again in the Caribbean. But I had a great tan. And it was fun because I do, after the 6 months, I was like, I never need to go here again. We have been to every corner of this island. But it was fun, and I like that. Um, and I just generally enjoy singing. I find if I'm like having a bad day or two, if I just even if I just do a warm up, even if I'm not actually singing anything, it makes me feel better. Um, what else? I like watching movies. I don't know. I feel like nothing too extravagant.
I love all those things too. They're so good, and I'm so excited to be able to travel and go and see live theater again once, hopefully soon,
Yeah.
and it'll be great. The like final thing I kind of want to leave off with is if there's anything else you want to add that you think this would be incomplete without.
Wow. Feel like I've already just talked so much. Um, what would I say? I don't know. I guess it all kind of goes back to just really doing it because you love it. Because it's really hard, and you have to make a lot of sacrifices. Sometimes you can't see your family when you want to see your family or your friends. Sometimes you can't go home for Christmas, or there are a lot of things in life that um, are important: weddings, funerals. Um, so it's like if you're not really in it to win it, do you really want to miss out on all of those like really important life things? It's yeah, sometimes you have to make those choices. And sometimes people choose, like, well, I can't do that show because my brother's getting married or my sister's getting married. And you have to make that choice. And then you're unemployed, but at least you'll be at the wedding. But that's what I mean. Like, it's not easy, and you have to make tough choices. And if you don't really, like I said, if you're not really like in it for the long haul, and if it's not really like what you think you want to keep pursuing, and you feel excited to learn more, then yeah, you gotta make sure you're doing. And then also, if it gets to the point that you realize like, oh, I'm not in it to win it, like this is not working for me, I don't want to miss all these things, I want to have like a steady income and a 401k. I shouldn't say that because you can have all of those things, but I'm just saying like it is difficult, and sometimes you do get to a point that you're like, you know what? For me, I did that for a while, and I had those experiences, and it was a great adventure, and I've met great people, but now I'm ready for something different, and that's okay too. So I think it's also learning like, yeah, you might get to a point that this is the love of your life, and then it's not, and that's okay too. So I think that's important to just like, I guess it just comes down to like continuing to evolve and being okay if you evolve out of, it's like a relationship. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. So it's all okay. But I think you should give it your all before you release it, if that's what happens. But no, I just think, yeah, that having a good, healthy determination is key.
Yeah, definitely. I've really enjoyed getting to talk to you. I think you have such an interesting perspective. So thank you so much.
My goodness, thank you. I feel honored that I was asked.